I never expected to feel anything when my brother-in-law walked into the kitchen that night. But the moment we were alone, the air changed. It was subtle, but impossible to ignore. I noticed him watching me, and instead of looking away, I held his gaze. What happened next became one of the most thrilling, heart-stopping moments of my entire life. Let me take you back to the beginning. I arrived at my sister's house for a short vacation. I only planned to stay for a couple of weeks, just long enough to catch my breath and get back on my feet. But those weeks stretched into a month, and that month melted into something blurrier, looser, harder to define. I told myself it was fine. I was saving money, resting, job hunting in a city I used to call home. But deep down, I knew the truth. It wasn't convenience keeping me there. It was him. The man who moved through that house like he had no idea the effect he had on everything, and everyone. Especially me. Dean. My brother-in-law. My sister's husband. He was rugged in that effortless, unbothered way. Always in faded jeans and soft t-shirts that clung just a little too perfectly to his chest. He had a voice so low it felt like a vibration against your spine when he spoke. He was tall, maybe 6'1", with strong forearms always dusted with a hint of work. He smelled faintly of sawdust and aftershave, the kind of man you couldn't help but notice, even if you tried. And believe me, I tried. I'd known him for years, at weddings, birthdays, barbecues. He was always the straight one. The charming, friendly, blue-eyed carpenter who never gave off a single signal. He married my sister 4 years ago. Had a good job, built their deck with his own 2 hands, never missed a family dinner. He was perfect, in the most frustrating way possible. And me? I was the gay younger brother, with a shaky freelance career and a bad habit of falling too hard, too fast, for all the wrong men. So when I moved into their guest room after leaving a toxic job in New York, I knew the rules. Be polite. Don't stare. Don't you dare imagine a thing. But that night, everything shifted. It was past midnight. Restless, I slipped out of bed. The summer heat was a thick, wet blanket clinging to the walls. I padded barefoot into the kitchen, hoping for some cold water, anything to quiet the restlessness inside me. The fridge light glowed like a lonely moon in the dark. I grabbed a slice of leftover pizza and leaned against the counter, half asleep, my shirt stuck to my back with sweat. And then I heard him. Footsteps. Bare feet on the cool tile. A low yawn. Then, his voice cut through the silence, deep and unexpected. Couldn't sleep either? I turned, startled. There he was. Standing in nothing but a pair of flannel pajama pants, his chest bare, his hair tousled from sleep. And for one sharp, breathless second, I forgot how to breathe. Yeah, I said, too quickly, my eyes desperately avoiding his chest, the way his stomach muscles flexed as he reached for a glass. Too hot. He opened the fridge behind me, and for a heartbeat, we were pressed too close. My back was almost grazing his stomach. I didn't move. He didn't either. The air grew heavy, charged. He grabbed a bottle of orange juice, turned, and his arm brushed against my shoulder. Damn. Sorry, he said. Tight kitchen. It's okay, I muttered. I knew I should leave, but my feet were rooted to the spot. He poured the juice, took a slow sip, then leaned against the opposite counter, just watching me. The pizza crust in my hand suddenly felt ridiculous. Didn't think you were a midnight snacker, he said, a half-smile playing on his lips. I shrugged, finding a sliver of courage. Didn't think you were a shirtless juice drinker. He grinned, a lazy, crooked thing. Guilty as charged. It's too hot for shirts. He stretched, his arms going over his head, his abs tightening into perfect definition. I didn't mean to look, but my God, I looked. And when my eyes found his again, the smirk was gone. He was just staring. Direct. Quiet. Focused. I could turn the fan on in your room if you want, he offered. His tone was casual, but his eyes were anything but. No, it's fine, I replied, my voice softer than I intended. I kind of like the heat. Something in the way he looked at me made the kitchen shrink until it was just the two of us. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the world. He stepped closer. Slowly. Not enough to cross a line, but enough to test its very edge. You've always been different, you know that, he said. I blinked. Different how? He gave a small shrug. Just, not like everyone else in this family. I let out a short laugh. Is that code for gay? His grin twitched. Maybe. But I meant it as a compliment. That surprised me. Didn't know you gave those out. He took another small step closer. Only when they're deserved. We were too close now. Close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his bare skin. My pulse hammered in my throat. I swallowed, my mouth suddenly dry. Dean? Yeah? What are we doing? He looked at me then, really looked. Like he could see every hidden crush I'd ever buried, every secret glance, every time I'd bitten my tongue to keep the peace. Only when they're deserved. We were too close now. Close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his bare chest. My pulse hammered in my throat. I swallowed, my mouth dry as dust. Dean? Yeah? What are we doing? He looked at me then, really looked. Like he saw everything. Every quiet crush I'd ever buried. Every secret I'd locked away. Every single time I'd bitten my tongue to keep the peace in this family. I don't know, he said, his voice raw, honest. I saw you standing here, Anne. He didn't finish. He just let the sentence hang there, unfinished and heavy. His hand brushed against mine on the counter. It was barely a touch, but it stayed. He didn't pull away, and neither did I. We stood like that for a long moment, his fingers trailing over mine like they belonged there. Our eyes were locked. I should have stepped back. I should have made a stupid joke to shatter the unbearable tension. But instead, I whispered, I think I'm going to go to bed. He nodded slowly, but his hand stayed on mine. Good night, he said, his voice low, almost regretful. Night. I slipped past him, feeling his body just inches from mine. My skin buzzed everywhere his touch had lingered. And as I walked back to the guest room, my heart a frantic drum in my ears, I knew something had happened. Something that would be impossible to undo. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every second of it. The look in his eyes. The quiet, unspoken hunger. It was just a moment. But it wasn't nothing. I should have gone to bed, but instead, I stood there like a fool, pretending not to notice how his eyes dropped to my lips, and stayed there. And that was the moment. The true beginning of this forbidden story. The next morning, I woke to the sound of birds and the clatter of breakfast dishes from the kitchen. My sister's laughter drifted down the hallway, followed by Dean's voice, easy, familiar, casual. Like nothing had happened. But something had. And now it was stitched under my skin, a splinter I couldn't dig out. I dragged myself into the shower, letting the water pound against my shoulders. I stared at the tile and thought about the way his fingers had brushed mine. How he'd looked at me like he was trying to make sense of a puzzle he hadn't expected to want. And how I'd stood there, letting it happen. By the time I joined them in the kitchen, the eggs were done. Dean was rinsing dishes while my sister poured juice. She was barefoot, her hair messy, humming to some indie song on the speaker. Dean glanced over his shoulder when I walked in. Morning. Hey, I said, my voice too even. He didn't stare. Didn't smirk. He just went back to washing. But I noticed. The way his jaw tightened. The way he didn't look at me again. I sat at the table and sipped my coffee, my eyes trailing over his back. The muscles moved beneath his t-shirt with every motion, controlled, intentional, like he was trying so hard not to think, or feel, or remember. But I remembered. And it was a mess in all the worst ways. That morning passed with small talk and chores. We went our separate ways after lunch. My sister headed out to meet a friend, Dean went to fix something in the garage, and I pretended to be productive on my laptop. But all I could do was replay the way his hand had lingered. The way it hadn't felt like an accident. Around 4, I walked into the garage, pretending to need a screwdriver. Dean was hunched over a workbench, drilling into a slab of wood. He didn't look up. Need something? Just a tool. Drawer to the left. I opened it, my fingers skimming over screwdrivers and pliers. I didn't need anything. I just needed to be near him again. To know I wasn't losing my mind. About last night. I began. He paused the drill but still didn't turn. What about it? I hesitated, unsure if I was brave or stupid. I don't want things to be weird. He finally turned, slowly. Like every movement cost him something. They're not weird, he said. Unless you make them weird. That was rich. Coming from the man who'd practically pressed his chest to mine over orange juice. I'm not imagining it, am I? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Dean's jaw worked for a second, grinding tight before he exhaled. I don't know what you're imagining, man. I had a few drinks. You looked, never mind. I stepped closer. I saw the way you looked at me. He swallowed, then turned back to the bench, picking up a sander like the conversation was over. Forget it. It didn't mean anything. But the way his hand tightened around the handle, the way he refused to meet my eyes. I knew it meant something. Maybe not everything, but definitely not nothing. That night, after dinner, my sister went to bed early with a headache. I stayed up watching television on the couch, pretending not to be waiting. But I was. Dean passed behind me, brushing his hand across the back of the sofa. Then he returned with a beer and sat at the other end. The movie played. Neither of us watched. Eventually, he spoke. Have you always been this quiet? Only when I'm trying not to say the wrong thing. What's the wrong thing? I glanced at him. Anything that makes you run. Maybe I should. Maybe you don't want to. The silence stretched. The only sound was the soft clink of his beer bottle on the coaster. He leaned back, stretching an arm across the back of the couch. His fingers were inches from my shoulder. You make it hard to breathe, you know that, he said quietly. I turned my head, my heart slamming against my ribs. You think I'm doing this on purpose? I think. I don't know what the hell I'm doing anymore. We sat in that messy honesty, the kind that doesn't come with a solution. After a while, he stood. I'm turning in. He paused at the stairs, looked back once, and I thought maybe he'd come back. Maybe he'd say something else. But he didn't. The next few days were a blur of almosts. Everything was a charged moment. Passing each other in the hallway. Standing too close in the laundry room. His hand brushed my lower back as he reached for a cabinet. It was subtle, calculated, but it was there. A low hum between us, always just beneath the surface. One afternoon, I was on the patio reading when Dean came out with a toolbox. His shirt clung to his chest, and his arms were dusted with sweat and sawdust. He squatted to fix a loose panel near the deck stairs, and I couldn't look away. You stare like you've never seen a man use tools before, he said, not looking up. You sweat like you know someone's watching. That made him glance up. There was heat in his eyes, but also something wary. Are you always this bold? Only when I know the other person's thinking the same thing. He stood slowly, wiping his hands on a rag. Careful. Why? Because I might stop pretending. I stood too, walking until we were inches apart. Then stop. Dean looked at me, breathing hard. And for a second, I thought he would. I thought he'd take that step, close the space, and end this agonizing guessing game. But he didn't. He turned and walked inside, leaving me standing there, burning. That night, I couldn't sleep again. I wandered into the kitchen around midnight, drawn by habit, or maybe by hope. The lights were off. The house was still. Then I heard the soft sound of the fridge opening. It was Dean. He stood in the same place as before, bathed in that same pale glow, shirtless, a beer in his hand. We looked at each other like strangers who were too familiar to pretend. "Are you always this hungry at midnight?" I asked. He didn't answer. Just took a slow sip and leaned back against the counter. I stepped closer. 1 step. 2. "Say something," I whispered. He looked at me, his eyes dark. "If I do, I'm afraid I'll say everything." "Then say it." His gaze dropped to my lips. Held there. Heat bloomed in the space between us. But still, he didn't move. I did. I brushed past him, intentionally close, grabbing a glass just so my arm grazed his stomach. He didn't flinch. Didn't move. The silence stretched again, and I knew he was thinking about it, too. The storm started sometime around midnight. A distant grumble that grew into a low, steady patter of rain against the windows. The house groaned softly with every gust of wind. The power flickered twice before settling into a tense stillness. I was in bed, staring at the ceiling, fully awake. Not because of the thunder, but because of him. Because of Dean. The past few nights had turned into a quiet, unbearable war of nerves. One that neither of us wanted to acknowledge, but both of us kept playing. It wasn't just glances anymore. It was the way he stood a little too close when passing behind me. The way his fingers lingered a second too long when handing me a mug. The way his lips parted like he was about to speak, then closed again without a word. I could feel him peeling me open, slowly, without touching, without speaking, just with the weight of his silence. And it was working. I checked the time. 1:12 a.m. The house was dark, quiet except for the steady rhythm of the rain. And I knew if I walked into that kitchen again, he'd be there. Like we both knew what that space had become. So I got up. Not out of sleepiness or hunger, but out of something closer to surrender. The hallway was dim. I passed the closed door to my sister's bedroom. No light under the crack. No movement. I swallowed hard and padded down the stairs. When I entered the kitchen, the light above the stove was already on. That soft, muted glow that made the space feel intimate. Like a secret. And there he was. Dean stood with his back to me, leaning over the sink, shirtless again, a glass of water in his hand. He didn't turn. He didn't need to. "I knew you'd come down," he said quietly. My throat tightened. "How?" He shrugged one shoulder, still facing away. "Because I wanted you to." The words hit me like a jolt. I stared at his back, unsure whether to run or step closer. "You said it didn't mean anything," I said, slow and deliberate. I lied. He finally turned to face me. His eyes. God. Those eyes were darker in the low light. His chest rose and fell a little faster than normal. And when he stepped forward, the distance between us vanished. "You should go back to bed," he said, but there was no conviction in it. "You want me to?" I asked, not moving. He hesitated. "No." I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. I waited. Dean closed the space between us slowly, like every step cost him something. He stopped inches away, his chest just barely brushing mine, and I could feel the heat rolling off his skin. "I've thought about this," he murmured, almost to himself. I swallowed. "For how long?" His gaze searched mine. "Longer than I should have." I could have said something then. I could have said he was married to my sister. That this was a line that couldn't be uncrossed. But I didn't. Because when his hand lifted, hesitant, shaking, and cupped my jaw, I leaned into it. His thumb brushed the corner of my mouth. "If you want me to stop," he breathed, his voice a ragged whisper, "tell me now. To stop, say it now." But I didn't say a thing. And then his lips were on mine. It wasn't soft. It wasn't sweet. It was years of denial crashing through us in a single, desperate breath. His mouth was hot, tasting of rain and fear and a hunger I'd only ever dreamed of. I kissed him back with everything I had, my fingers fisting in his hair, my chest pressed to his, our bodies fitting together like they'd been meant to all along. He groaned against my mouth, a deep, low sound, and backed me against the counter, his hands gripping my waist like he'd finally allowed himself to want what he'd always feared. We kissed like we didn't have a choice, like something bigger than us had pulled us together and locked us in that moment. I felt his hips against mine, hard and urgent. I felt the way he trembled when I ran my hands over his chest, down his stomach, exploring the lines I'd memorized from 1,000 stolen glances. He tasted like water and heat. Like something forbidden and permanent. We broke apart for air, gasping, our foreheads pressed together. "Tell me to stop," he whispered again, but his hands never left my body. I shook my head, pulling him back to me. He lifted me onto the counter without a word, stepping between my legs, his lips trailing fire down my neck. I arched into him, my hands clutching his shoulders, and for a few minutes, the world stopped existing outside that kitchen. The storm roared outside, but we only heard each other. Breath. Heartbeat. Soft gasps and stifled moans. It didn't go all the way. Not that night. Clothes shifted. Yes. Skin met skin. His hand slid under my shirt, mine inside his waistband. But just before we crossed that final threshold, he paused. "I want to," he breathed, his voice wrecked. "God, I want to." "Then do it," I begged. But he pulled back gently, shaking his head. "I can't. Not yet." I nodded, even though every inch of me ached for more. He kissed me again, slow this time, tender. Like an apology. Like a promise. And then he stepped back, chest heaving, running a hand through his hair. We didn't speak as he reached for a kitchen towel and handed it to me. He stood there for a minute longer, like he didn't want to leave. But eventually, he turned and walked away. I stayed on the counter, my legs still trembling, my breath shallow. I didn't move until the rain started to slow. When I finally slid off and made my way back upstairs, the hallway felt longer. Quieter. I passed my sister's door again, still closed, still dark, and I hated myself just a little bit more. I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, my lips still swollen, my neck still damp from his breath. This wasn't a fantasy anymore. This was real. And no matter what happened next, we had crossed the line. We kissed like it meant something. And now it was too late to pretend it didn't. The next morning came heavy with silence. The rain had passed, but the air still felt thick, like it hadn't quite let go of the night before. I avoided the kitchen. I didn't trust myself to stand there and not relive every second of what we'd done. Every sound, every moan, every desperate kiss. Dean didn't speak to me all morning. We passed each other in the hallway once, and he gave me a single, silent nod. That was it. Not a word, not a glance that lingered. And I told myself that was good. Safer. Cleaner. That last night had been a one-time collapse, an impulse driven by the storm and the late hour. That was the lie I used to survive the day. But that night, when the house quieted again, when my sister slipped into bed early and said, "I'm out for the night," I knew. Dean stayed downstairs. And I stayed upstairs. But not for long. Because the moment the clock hit midnight, I heard the fridge door open. I moved without thinking. When I reached the kitchen, he was already waiting. He didn't speak. Neither did I. There was no small talk this time, no jokes to cut the tension. Just the dim glow from the stove light and the heat between us, rising fast and sharp. Dean stepped forward first. His eyes were dark, his jaw clenched. Like this had been building in him all day. Maybe for days. Maybe longer. "You're not going to stop me this time," he said, his voice rough. "I don't want you to." And that was it. He reached for me with both hands, pulling me against him like he couldn't get close enough, like he'd waited too long to be gentle. Our mouths crashed together, hard and hot, our teeth knocking before the kiss smoothed into something deeper, more desperate. I clung to his shoulders as he walked me backward until I hit the kitchen table. He lifted me without a word, setting me on the edge, stepping between my legs, kissing me like he needed to taste every breath I had. His hands were everywhere, on my neck, under my shirt, gripping my thighs. He kissed down my throat, trailing his tongue over the same spot he'd teased the night before. I gasped, my hips rocking against him, the table creaking beneath us. There were no pauses this time. No hesitation, no whispered "I can't." Dean was all motion, all fire, all hunger. He peeled off my shirt and pressed his mouth to my chest, kissing, biting, groaning against my skin. My hands slipped under the waistband of his sweatpants, and he hissed when I touched him. "This isn't supposed to happen," he murmured, even as he kissed me harder. "I know it's not." "Then stop," I whispered, knowing he wouldn't. And he didn't. We moved like we'd been doing this for years, like our bodies already knew each other. He laid me back on the table, his breath ragged against my ear. The table was cold against my spine, but every inch of me burned. I pulled him closer, wrapped my legs around him, and when our hips aligned, when he finally pushed in, slowly, fully, my mouth opened in a silent cry. Dean moaned, a deep, guttural sound, his forehead pressed to mine. "Jesus Christ," he breathed. He moved with a rhythm that felt practiced, but it wasn't. It was pure need. Urgency. A slow, aching climb that made my fingers claw at his back, made my throat tighten around every stifled cry. The kitchen was filled with sounds we couldn't take back. Skin against skin. Low curses. The thud of the table legs shifting under our weight. We didn't rush it. It wasn't fast or rough. It was drawn out and desperate. Every thrust a confession. Every kiss a surrender. His hand gripped mine above my head, our fingers laced. And I couldn't stop looking at him, at his eyes, blown wide and wild, the way his mouth stayed parted like he couldn't believe what he was doing. And still, he didn't stop. He leaned down, his lips brushing my ear as he whispered, "You feel like home." And I almost lost it right there. I didn't say anything back. I couldn't. My voice was gone. Only breath remained, and movement. And when it ended, when we finally collapsed together, soaked in sweat, our hearts hammering against each other like fists on a locked door, we didn't speak. We just lay there, tangled in the silence. Eventually, he pulled out gently, pressing one last kiss to my jaw before stepping back. I sat up slowly, still on the edge of the table, still trying to figure out if this had really happened, if we'd really gone that far, if there was any way back from it. Dean grabbed a dish towel and handed it to me again. It was almost comical, like this was becoming our routine. "You okay?" he asked. I looked at him, his hair a mess, his skin flushed, his lips red. "I think that's the wrong question," I said. "Are you okay?" He hesitated. "I don't know." I stood and pulled my shirt back on. And we just stood there, facing each other, like we were waiting for the other to decide what came next. But there was no next. Not yet. I moved to the sink and poured myself a glass of water. He watched me the whole time. "You're not going to say it was a mistake again?" I asked quietly. He shook his head. "No." I turned to him. "Then what was it?" Dean didn't answer. He just stepped closer, his silence louder than any word could ever be. He leaned forward, pressed his forehead to mine, and just breathed with me for a long, suspended moment. His breath was warm, his skin damp with the same tension that coiled in my stomach. "It was real," he said finally, his voice a low, broken rasp. "And that's what scares the hell out of me." He kissed me once more, soft, slow, like he didn't want it to end, like he was memorizing the feel of me. Then, he turned and left the kitchen, walking up the stairs without another word. I stayed behind, barefoot on the cold tile, my arms wrapped around myself. The kitchen still smelled like him, sawdust and sweat and us. And I knew, whatever we'd started, whatever line we had just destroyed, it could never be undone. It wasn't just lust. It wasn't just loneliness. It was him. And I wasn't ready to give that up. I fell asleep with the scent of him still on my skin. And when I woke, the kitchen felt haunted. Like the walls remembered every whispered word, every touch. Even if he tried to forget. The morning after was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't just sit in a room, it presses against it, stretching out between people like an invisible thread, straining until it snaps. I came downstairs to find Dean already dressed, shaven, coffee made. His back was to me, as usual. From a distance, he looked exactly the same. But I wasn't the same. And neither was the kitchen. It was the same tile under my feet, the same countertop, but now it was all soaked in memory. In heat, and sweat, and the sound of our skin meeting in the dark. I stood in the doorway, watching him pour a second cup of coffee like he hadn't had me right there, just hours ago. "Morning," I said, because I didn't know what else to say. He turned slightly, offering a tight, strained smile. "Hey." That was it. No touch, no glance that lingered. Just a mug handed to me with a steadiness that felt like a lie. "Sleep okay?" he asked, and I almost laughed at the absurdity. "Not really." He nodded, like he understood, even though he refused to meet my eyes. I hated it. I hated how easily he could pretend, how well practiced he seemed in this game of selective memory. We sat at the table across from each other, coffee in hand, silence thick between us. The very table where he had kissed every inch of my skin, where he'd whispered things into my ear that still echoed in my chest. And now he couldn't even look at me. Was it that bad? I finally asked, my voice low. His brow furrowed. "What?" "Last night. You've barely looked at me." Dean sighed, leaned back, and rubbed the back of his neck. "It's not that. It's... I don't know how to do this." "Do what?" He looked up at me then, really looked. And his eyes weren't cold or indifferent. They were torn. "This," he said. "Wanting you. After everything. I've never..." He trailed off. "You've never wanted a guy before?" I offered quietly. He nodded once. "Except you." "At least one." "That doesn't make it easier." "No," I agreed. "But it makes it real." He looked away again, his jaw tight. It was real. That's the problem. The front door opened just then, my sister's voice cutting through the kitchen as she returned from her morning walk. Dean stood up fast, almost knocking over his chair. I stayed seat. Watching him disappear down the hallway like the conversation had never happened. Like we had never happened. The rest of the day blurred. My sister chatted and laughed like the world was normal, like nothing had shifted under her roof. Dean played the role of perfect husband, well, too well. He grilled lunch, helped her fold laundry, even offered to run to the store with her. And I drifted through the hours like a ghost. Like someone who'd seen too much and wasn't allowed to speak about it. That night, I stayed upstairs. I couldn't go back into the kitchen. Not yet. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fan, wondering if he was doing the same just down the hall. Wondering if the memory of me was driving him as insane as his was haunting me. Then I heard a soft knock on my door. I sat up fast. But it wasn't Dean. It was my sister. She poked her head in, holding a laundry basket. Hey. You okay? You've been off today. I forced a smile. Just tired. She stepped inside, set the basket down. I know staying here isn't exactly thrilling, but we're happy to have you. Dean said you two have been getting along well. My stomach twisted. Yeah. We've been fine. She gave me a look, her eyes soft with concern. Just don't disappear on us, okay? I know things haven't been easy for you. I'm not disappearing, I said. But the lie stung. She left with a kiss on my cheek, and the door creaked closed behind her. I waited another hour before I crept downstairs. The lights were off again. The kitchen was empty. I poured myself a drink, something stronger than coffee, and leaned against the same counter where Dean had once kissed me so hard I forgot how to breathe. But tonight, he didn't come. No footsteps, no fridge door, no whispered confessions. Just me, and the silence. And I hated that I missed him. The next day, Dean barely spoke to me again. But he watched me. When he thought I wasn't looking, at breakfast, while I stood in the garden, while I helped my sister prep dinner, he watched. And when I finally caught his gaze, I didn't look away. Not anymore. Later that night, after my sister had gone to bed, I found him in the garage. The door was open. A single light flickered above his workbench. He was sanding something but stopped when he saw me. Are you avoiding me? I asked. No, he said, too quickly. Then what the hell is this? He wiped his hands on a rag, his jaw clenched. This is me trying not to blow up my entire life. You already did, I said. You just don't want to admit it. Dean exhaled hard, setting the rag down. I don't know what you want me to say. I want the truth. He stared at me, the fight draining from his eyes. Fine. I think about you every damn second. I dream about you. I replay everything we did like it's the only thing that makes sense anymore. But I don't know what to do about it. I stepped forward. You don't have to do anything. But don't pretend it didn't happen. Don't pretend I didn't happen. He looked like he wanted to reach for me, but he didn't. Instead, he said, if I let myself want you again, I won't be able to stop. Then don't stop, I said. Dean's eyes dropped to my lips again. That same look. That same hunger. But he shook his head. Not here. I stepped closer, my voice a challenge. Then where? He said nothing. Because we both knew. There was nowhere. Not without hurting people. Not without breaking something we could never fix. We stood in that painful truth for a long moment. And then I turned and walked away. This time, he didn't follow. The next morning, I packed my bags. My sister was still asleep. Dean stood by the window in the living room, arms crossed, watching the sunrise. I paused behind him. I need to go. He turned slowly. I figured. We stood inches apart, both of us too afraid to move, to breathe. I'm not leaving because of what happened, I said. I'm leaving because of what we can't do. Dean's voice was hoarse, raw with an emotion he couldn't name. I wish I was braver. I wish you were, too. He stepped forward then, stopped himself, and just reached out, brushing my wrist with 2 fingers. A touch so light it was almost a memory. I'll never forget you, he said. I'll never forgive you, I replied softly. But I'll never stop wanting you, either. I walked out with my bag slung over my shoulder, my heart a mess, my body still aching, shared between 2 people. The silence between us felt too full. And yet, I knew it was only the beginning. Tomorrow, my sister will call. She'll ask why I left so suddenly. I'll have to smile. Pretend I needed space. Pretend the air in that house didn't still smell like him. Could I really do that? Could I look at Dean across a crowded table at the next family gathering and ignore what we'd shared? The way his hands had memorized me. The way his mouth still lived on my skin. I didn't know. And the worst part? I wasn't even sure I wanted to look away. Because as wrong as it all was, a part of me needed him to walk back into that kitchen. A part of me wanted to fall apart all over again. This was supposed to be the end. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Some lines, once crossed, don't get redrawn. They fade. They blur, until you can't remember who you were before. And if you know what a man's supposed to do after that, I'm all ears. Because I've been replaying it over and over, and I still don't have the answer. Let me know in the comments. Maybe your story helps make sense of mine.